Hello, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How to Add Layered Protection to Cloud Applications. My name is Evan Flugrat, and I am joined by today's presenter, Maurice McMullin. Before we begin, I want to draw to your attention the questions panel, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. You may need to expand the panel by clicking the plus sign or down arrow for full view. We will take questions at the end of the demonstration. You are encouraged to submit those questions at any time. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available after its conclusion. I will now hand it over to Maurice for the demonstration portion of this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello and welcome. My name is Maurice McMullin and I'm a product manager at Progress with responsibility for LoadMaster load balancing products. Today I'm going to bring you through some of the security features of LoadMaster and how they can be layered onto your cloud infrastructure to deliver enhanced security. Firstly, let's look what we're up against. The internet is a dangerous place with many bad actors who are using automated tools to attack organizations of all sizes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Regardless of your organization size, hackers will attack networks to extort, to steal data that may be of value, or even to use your organization as a launch pad for subsequent attacks. So in this session, we'll look at how hackers attack and what we can do to mitigate these attacks and to preserve the security and availability of applications in the cloud. So let's kick off by looking at denial of service attacks. Denial of service attacks are generally malicious or vindictive. They seldom will actually attempt to break into your network, but instead will swamp your site with traffic, which impacts normal service. This can result in serious financial cost from lost business transactions, potential reputational cost, and the impact on day-to-day business. Attacks can be based around network-layered protocols and used well-known attack techniques such as UDP reflection and SYN floods. Other attacks can be focused on the application layer, usually the HTTP protocol, where the web server is swamped with requests. Your first line of protection against a denial of service attack is your cloud service provider. All cloud service providers have protections in place to mitigate against large-scale attacks, also known as distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS. The DDoS protection layer from your cloud service provider will in general work well against attacks that happen at the network layer. However, if the attack is more targeted, with lower traffic volumes and also operating at the application layer, the DDoS protection from your service provider may not detect the attack. An attack at the application layer attempts to overload the application servers with requests that may not be detectable by the network and bandwidth-focused DDoS protection from your cloud service provider. This is where LoadMaster can provide an additional layer of protection to augment the cloud-native DDoS services. So now we'll look at how we can add some DDoS protection with LoadMaster. The first layer of protection is to block traffic from known malicious sources based on their IP address. LoadMaster maintains a list of malicious IP addresses that is updated regularly and will drop connection requests from these IP addresses before they get to the application servers. As newly compromised endpoints are constantly appearing, this list will not catch all traffic, but it can be augmented by administrators to further reduce malicious traffic. LoadMaster can also block all known IP addresses from specific countries, further minimizing the risk of an attack. The IP reputation controls, which is what we call this IP blocking, can be applied to LoadMaster's global server load balancing feature, where DNS requests from malicious actors are ignored, and also on the load balancing appliance in the cloud. To further reduce the potential impact of a denial of service attack, LoadMaster can apply rate limits to traffic, preventing bad actors from swamping the application servers. Rate limiting can be applied on absolute bandwidth amount, the number of connections per second, the number of open connections at any one time, or the number of requests per second. Rate limiting can be applied selectively or across all services and to all sources based on expected normal traffic patterns, but also tailored to specific sources based on IP or network address. Rate limiting and IP reputation controls may be updated in real time, providing a way to quickly shut down an in-progress attack, leading to quicker restoration of normal service levels to the business. So with IP reputation and rate limiting, we can enhance the cloud platform's DDoS protection to further reduce the volume of malicious traffic getting through to application servers. Next, we are going to look at vulnerability exploits, where hackers exploit common weaknesses in web applications to gain access to systems. New exploits against web applications are constantly emerging, whether against the toolsets or libraries used to build the applications, or against inherent weaknesses in how the application was developed, or even how it was deployed. As shown by industry research, not only do many applications have these vulnerabilities, but the detection and fixing of these problems is a major challenge. Many of these attacks tend to be bot-based and focus on well-known vulnerabilities, which have been monitored and classified by a non-profit organization known as OWASP, and they produce an annual list of the top 10 exploits being seen in the wild. OWASP are an independent, industry-supported group who are focused on application security. We can see here their current list. The 2022 list has not yet been issued. The vulnerabilities being exploited change over the years, but there are some that have been constantly in the top 10 list for the years. Issues such as injection, outdated components, and server-side forgery are perennials on this list. The LoadMaster Web Application Firewall, or WAF, provides protection against known and emerging web attacks. It employs a set of rules that not only include defense against the OWASP top 10, but many other vulnerabilities as well. While the base set of rules offers comprehensive protection, they may require some fine-tuning to remove false positives. Administrators can also create custom rules to address application or business-specific requirements. LoadMaster WAF is totally integrated on the load balancing appliance and supports things like per application WAF configuration. Now let's look at how hackers use bots to exploit weaknesses around user credentials. A brute force attack is a pretty crude approach to trying to get access. Generally, the bot will use a common username such as admin or accounts to make multiple login attempts using passwords from a dictionary of commonly used passwords. These types of attacks are generally not successful, but can impact on performance if generating a lot of login requests. Credential stuffing is another automated approach used by hackers and is more likely to succeed. The vulnerability stems from the fact that people will often register on third-party websites with their corporate email address and reuse their corporate password. If this third-party site gets compromised and the username and password is stolen, hackers will then attempt to log in using these stolen credentials. These login attempts are highly automated, with successful logins being retained and then reused in focused hacking attempts against the business. Let's have a look at LoadMaster authentication. LoadMaster includes a client authentication service that integrates at the back end with all major identity providers such as Active Directory, Radius, LDAP, as well as cloud-based services such as Azure Active Directory. Before access is given to any load-balanced resource, clients must successfully authenticate with LoadMaster and optionally be authorized by a method such as group membership or a LoadMaster Zero Trust Network Access policy. If load-balanced applications are also integrated with the identity provider, LoadMaster can perform single sign-on, reducing the number of logins that a user has to perform. Even if the application has no concept of authentication or users, you can use pre-authentication to control access to that app, regardless of the fact that it knows nothing about users or authentication. One of the simplest ways to stop a bot-based credential attack is to use a CAPTCHA. LoadMaster supports the creation of custom login screens with embedded CAPTCHA challenges to create the first hurdle for any bot-based credential attack. Some of the more advanced CAPTCHA services, such as reCAPTCHA from Google, have a high rate of bot detection and will use previous browsing history and even how your mouse moves to decide whether you get a simple "I'm not a robot" tick box or a more complex image matching challenge. Using an advanced CAPTCHA service will offer protection against brute force and credential stuffing attacks. As an aside, many organizations have a policy to not use email addresses as usernames for corporate applications, specifically to prevent the opportunity for credential stuffing attacks. Another method of preventing attacks is to implement some form of two-factor authentication, whether using a one-time password token or SMS. You could consider using a two-step verification service such as Microsoft Authenticator as well. Using a two-factor authentication is effective against bots as they simply won't be able to satisfy the secondary challenge. LoadMaster has native support for all the major two-factor authentication providers, making integration very, very simple. And if you need, you can also further lock down access by enforcing the use of client certificates on client devices. Earlier, I mentioned ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. And Zero Trust Network Access is an approach to application and resource access that trusts no client entity and only grants access when explicitly defined by policies. It takes a nobody is trusted stance and only grants access after the client has successfully authenticated. Zero Trust starts by taking into account the identity of the client and the context of the access request, such as what device or network a user is coming from. Is it from a corporate managed device and so on? Are they working from home? Are they, in a third country? All those are brought into the mix. So once authenticated, clients are then authorized based on the policy with just enough access to allow them to connect to the resources. LoadMaster can act as a ZTNA gateway with easy definition of policies via API, simplifying the integration with other security and policy tool sets. I've been using the term client here rather than user, as one significant use case for ZTNA is to control application to application access when a LoadMaster is acting as an API gateway. So in summary, LoadMaster can add significantly to your cloud security as an integrated security enforcement point. It augments your cloud platform security services to deliver that multi-layered approach to application security and availability. LoadMaster is available on all the major cloud platforms and also as a virtual appliance if you want to do an on-premise deployment. Depending on the cloud platform, you can opt for an hourly pay-as-you-go subscription, an annual subscription, or a perpetual license. To get started with a free trial, go to your cloud marketplace or visit kemp.ax. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for that demonstration, Maurice. We're now going to turn this over to a Q&A portion here. So I'll invite Maurice to come back on here. We're now taking your questions, so please submit your questions in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Maurice, I will turn it back over to you with some questions that we had pre-submitted. So our first question here is it possible to use CAPTCHA without a username and password?
Yes, absolutely. The authentication on LoadMaster would allow for a custom screen that essentially would only have the CAPTCHA. There'd be no username or password prompt in it. And I can see where that question was coming from. The questioner is thinking of getting the value of the CAPTCHA protection for essentially unauthenticated access to services. So yeah, good question. I should have highlighted that actually in the presentation as a potential use case there as well.
That's great. Another question that we have here is, can you elaborate on API gateway functionality?
Yeah, the API gateway capabilities in LoadMaster provide a way to essentially hide multiple API providers behind a single endpoint. So rather than having multiple different APIs exposed to the internet, you put them all behind the LoadMaster. It gives a single access point. And with that, then you can use ZTNA to provide fine-grained access control and control what API services and even individual API calls may be accessed by anybody connecting into the service. And the API gateway can integrate multiple APIs, so they could be running on a containerized environment. Another API could be provided by a more traditional application, and they could even be in different clouds. And you can integrate all of those together and through one access point, which is strongly authenticated and provides authenticated access as well to each of the individual APIs and access controls on how people get to them. So that's essentially the LoadMaster API functionality in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you, Maurice. And I want to just remind everyone that if you have any questions, go ahead and submit those in the questions panel, and we will take a few more questions here. Maurice, I had another one submitted. How does blocking a full country work? Can the LoadMaster detect VPN users?
Right. Okay, I'll answer the second part of that first. Can it detect VPN users? If you are in country A and using a VPN, that makes you look as if you're coming from country B, then LoadMaster will see you as coming from country B. It won't be able to see past the VPN. So the IP reputation blocking will not see the actual client IP there and be able to block it. In terms of how does the blocking a full country work, in the UI, there's a list of countries, and you just click the countries you want to block. That's how it's presented to the administrator. So it's very simple from that point of view. In behind that, the IP reputation database in there essentially has a list of all the IP address blocks assigned to a particular or assigned to particular organizations in a particular country. Now, obviously, some organizations, let's say they're US based, some of their users may actually be using those IP addresses in, in another country. So it isn't 100% foolproof, but it gives a fairly good way of doing a blanket blockage on some of the countries that are maybe sources for these type of bot attacks.
That's great. And I wanted to ask one more question here about ZTNA and the functionalities within LoadMaster to enable ZTNA. So I don't know if you could expand on that some.
Yeah, LoadMaster and at its core has it's a proxy. It has access control rules there as well in there, where you can actually create access controls to say, if somebody tries to access this something containing this pattern. So it's essentially could be a a storage directory. It could be a URL on a web server. You can do you can essentially block that. With ZTNA, you tie that in as well to the authentication, where you look at somebody's membership of groups and decide how you're going to allow traffic to go through. So you can do fine-grained access control there. And all of that can be configured over the LoadMaster API. So you can programmatically push your policies into LoadMaster, and that also can look at things like where somebody's coming from, etc. as well, the source. So programmatically, you can control it. It makes use of all these services that are built into LoadMaster and essentially integrates a lot of those features together into a simple overall zero trust network access gateway.
That's great information. Thank you so much, Maurice. Maurice, I don't know if you had any more that you wanted to share, anything else that came to mind that might be resourceful for our audience today?
No, but it's apart from the best thing to do is look at taking a trial. We are in the AWS and Azure marketplaces. We also have guidance on how to get active in some of the other clouds as well. And take a trial. You can take a trial. You can spin up a LoadMaster. You can position it alongside your existing service and turn on some of these services and see, and without disrupting your current infrastructure, to see how LoadMaster can interact with your own applications, how you can do authentication, how you can do blocking of etc., and have all those controls in there. So take it for a drive, and we'll be pretty confident that you'll like what you see.
Thank you so much. You summed it up very, very well. If no more questions today, we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you for attending so much. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks again.